There's an interesting new study about the death penalty in America that was just released. So here's a little bit of the backstory on the legal status of the death penalty in the U.S. In 2002 and 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty violates the Eighth Amendment protection from cruel, unusual punishment if they're using it to execute people under the age of 18 and to execute intellectually disabled people. But 3 legal researchers studied 100 recent executions, and they discovered that, quote, a majority of the executed inmates had a severe mental illness such as schizophrenia, PTSD, or psychosis. So, my reaction to this was the same as probably yours is right now, which is, huh? I thought that in 2002 and 2005 they decided it's unconstitutional to kill those people. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Well, it turns out, quote, the court has not yet extended those same protections to people with severe mental illness and that they have to juvenile offenders and people with intellectual disabilities. So, in other words, severe mental illness is not the same thing under law as somebody who's intellectually disabled. Apparently, those are 2 totally different things under the law. So while you can't kill somebody who's autistic or has an IQ of 50, for example, you can kill somebody with psychosis or severe depression that, led them to killing. So half the people killed by the death penalty in America have a severe mental illness. All right, sweet Jesus, that seems to me like that maybe should have been taken into account when determining the proper punishment. Now, this is on top of the recent study that came out that found that 4% of the people on death row are innocent. And, of course, the Innocence Project has exonerated hundreds of people who were on death row, but it turns out that, DNA evidence overturned it, or somebody came out and said, I lied when I was on the stand, or whatever the case happens to be. And there's a lot of evidence that we actually have already put to death a bunch of people who are innocent. There was one case that we covered recently from Texas where the guy's almost certainly not guilty. He definitely wouldn't have been found guilty having known the later information that came out on his case. So this is some scary stuff, man. And this is some unjust stuff. Look, here's the bottom line on the death penalty. When it comes to a philosophical debate, I actually might surprise, a lot of my liberal listeners when I say I'm actually totally in favor of the death penalty in theory. The idea that if we catch somebody and we have perfect information and we know that they're responsible for killing 20 children and disemboweling them and eating their faces and flushing them down the toilet and then sexually assaulting their dead bodies. Yes, there's so many crimes which are imaginable and actually happened in real life where I would say, fuck that guy, he should die. There's a lot of examples of that, right? And again, in theory, if we had perfect information, I'm not going to lose a wink of sleep when they put that guy to death, okay? In fact, I think that's justice being done. You're simply too big of a problem for society, and there's no hope for you ever. So I don't give a shit about you, all right? You've proven you're not able to, hang with the rest of us civilized folk, and you should be put to death. I have no problem with it. But, we don't get it right. That's why when it comes to theory versus real world, there's a big discrepancy. Because we could talk about it all day long in theory and philosophically, and again, in that debate, I'm 100% pro-death penalty. But when it comes to the actual implementation of it, humans are beyond fallible. And you're going to get, prosecutors who are willing to fudge evidence and people who are willing to lie on the stand to get time off. And you're going to get, a lot of fuck-ups possibly with evidence collection and forensic evidence and sometimes DNA problems like we had in the past when DNA evidence wasn't available and later it came out. And there's only 9,762 ways in which we can fuck up. And even when we have every single protection in place, 4% of the time we still get it wrong. 4 out of every 100 people who we put to death are innocent. So in other words, our tax dollars are funding murder. Sometimes we get the right people, sometimes we get the wrong people. And if you're anti-murder, which I like to think all civilized people are, then you can't be in favor of the death penalty because we get the wrong person. Okay? And then when you add in the evidence that somebody might have a PTSD or psychosis, and then that's not taken into account in the same way that an intellectual disability is, like having a low IQ, there's something that sits wrong about that, man, because that's a relevant piece of information that should take certain things off the table, and it's not being taken into consideration. So overall, these are some damning findings, and I think maybe it's time for the U.S. to join the rest of the civilized world and say we're going to end the death penalty.